והיה עקב תשמעון את המשפטים האלה ושמרתם ועשיתם אותם ושמר יהוה אלוהיך לך את הברית ואת החסד אשר נשבע לאבותיך. Wherefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments and keep and do them, that YHWH, your Elohim, shall keep unto you the covenant and the mercy which he swore unto your fathers. Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread, where we're discussing the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashat is the third Parashat of the book of Devarim, and it's called Ekev, which means if. In this week's Parashat, my message for 2011-12 is called Understanding Results. This week's Parashat is an interesting Parashat. We have the word if, and the word if is something that I think is probably one, it's a small word, but it's something that is so overlooked, and it is so important in the scriptures that people look past it. Now the word Ekev, if, is usually followed with the phrase if or then. Like in this week's Parashat, if you see the concept of the opening part, if you hearken to these judgments and keep and do them, that YHWH your Elohim shall keep unto you the covenant and the mercy which he swore unto your fathers. This is a pretty big if. The fact is most people come in and they want to be part of the then, which is carried on in verse 13, 14, and 15, that he's going to bless your flocks, your grain, your wine, bring you to the land. There's going to be no barren among you. He's going to take away the diseases of Mitzrayim. They want all these things. They want to be the covenant people, but they don't want to do the if. Now, if we look at the basics, what we see here is there's three things we're responsible for. If we hearken unto the judgments, if we keep them and do them. So we're going to see that there's a process. Then he's going to keep unto you the covenant and the mercy. So that covenant is contingent, right? It says, which he swore unto your fathers. Even your fathers. It doesn't matter, right? They try to use that with Mashiach and say, hey, we're the seed of Avraham. Just because you're the seed of Avraham doesn't mean you have that covenant. Because that covenant that was made with the seed of Avraham didn't come with no strings attached. It came with this concept that you had to hearken, keep, and do those commandments. Avraham did it, and that's why he made the covenant with him. But if Avraham had turned and said, hey, I'm going to go worship this other false god, do you think he would still be under that covenant and receive all the blessings? I don't think so. You see, the word if, Ekev, is very important. It says that the meaning of that word if, it can also mean compensation or payments or results. So I wrote this message called Understanding Results to help people understand the if, to understand the connections to the ifs and the thens. Because a lot of people want to come in, and a lot of religions want to come in. They want to grab a hold of the blessings. The Jews want to say, well, we're the chosen people. Well, the Christians want to say, well, we're saved. We have Jesus. They want to say, we're going to get the blessings. We're going to get the kingdom. All these different people want to say the thens. They want to say, oh, well, we're going to get this, we're going to get that, and all that. But very few people in the Messianics are the same way. Very few people cling to the if. As a matter of fact, most of them, in some cases, they either ignore it or they want to say that it doesn't count. So Christians say, hey, we're going to be in that kingdom, right? The kingdom of heaven. Well, there's 12 gates. Those 12 gates have the names of the 12 tribes. There's no Christian gate, okay? There's no stranger gate. There's no Gentile gate. There's 12 gates that go into the kingdom. And each one of them is named after a tribe of Israel because it is Israel that gets to go into the kingdom. It is through Israel. And even the nations that join themselves, the strangers that join themselves, have to go in and take a piece of land with one of those 12 tribes. You see? They go among those 12 tribes. But this whole deal is about the 12 tribes. And the kingdom and all that, it's all contingent upon certain facts and certain things, that if you throw those things out, somehow you're ending up, you're a Christian ending up saying, well, I'm going to go to the kingdom of heaven, and yet they on the other side say, well, that other stuff, well, that was for the Jews. That was done, that Old Testament was for the Jews. That's done away with. Well, you better recheck your facts, because the Bible of Jesus and all of his followers was the Old Testament. Salvation for them is defined by the Old Testament. Mercy, grace, all those things defined by the Old Testament. Even the letters Paul's writing to the people, guess what the Bible they had in their hand was? It wasn't one of the letters of Paul. It was the Old Testament. So the scriptures that existed long before, after Mashiach came, and before they ever printed a New Testament or added those, even the very letters themselves that he's sending to them would have been read next to the Bible. They weren't taking Paul's letter as their Bible that he was writing to them. They had a Bible. That Bible was the Old Testament. And so any talk about grace or mercy or salvation or Mashiach was all in reference to their Bible, their expectation, their Torah. And so if you want to eliminate that, you have nothing. You don't have a real religion, you see. Because it's not even authentic to what the original followers who sat and looked in the eyes of Jesus, Yahushua, as I call him, and Yeshua, as some other people call him, in the Hebrew. When they sat and looked into his eyes and heard him talking, and they all had a Bible in their hand, that was that Old Testament, and none of them had a New Testament. None of them were saying, well, I said the sinner's prayer, or, hey, hold on a minute, Messiah, that doesn't line up with what Paul, 50 or 100 years later is going to say. Didn't happen. That's not authentic Christianity. So you got to get authentic and be able to prove your faith and all the tenets of your faith with the same thing that all of the original disciples did. Okay? So this is this concept, this word, if. And see, this is the difference. When you stop using logic and you don't put things in context, and you don't look at the whole sentence and the whole part of it, then you get into trouble. This is why people don't understand the difference between an observation and a meaning and a label, right? The result of what happens. Some people read the Word of God, that's the if, the Ekev, right? And then the result that comes out of the other day, you can have totally different results. Now, I was talking to a guy who was on my talking on my wall, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't use the word God." And I said, "Well," somebody had posted a post, and they had written the name. It was supposed to be over the controversy that was happening with Chick-fil-A, and it said something, and it had the writings, the ancient name of the ancient name of God. Or his name, I should say, in ancient Hebrew writing, right? In the Paleo Hebrew. The problem is they were addressing it to people, to the homosexuals, and to the people who weren't believers of God, right? And I said they should have just wrote the word God there, because someone's going to look at that unless they know ancient Hebrew, which I'm guessing most of those people don't, if they even know their Bible very well. Then it isn't going to mean anything to them. So talking in Hebrew for the sake of talking in Hebrew, that's great for you. But when you're talking to somebody else, you need to speak in the language that they know. Otherwise, I might as well just walk up and start talking Chinese to you and then wonder why you're not understanding what I'm saying. That's pretty stupid. See, the fact is, if you speak English, right? I love this as a perfect example. I saw this, anytime you see people trying to talk to somebody, right? I was in the post office one time, and there was a Russian gal in there, an older lady, who didn't speak any English. And so the guy there starting to go speaking slower and louder to her. What do you need? If she doesn't understand English, that's like her speaking loud, slow Russian to you, right? Privyet! It isn't, there's no point to it, okay? I can speak loud, slow Chinese, Spanish, Russian to someone who doesn't speak that language. That's the disconnect of the person, because they only see things from their one perspective. That they don't understand that in order to communicate to that lady, they better find somebody who speaks Russian. Or they better point and show them. But trying to speak a language that somebody doesn't understand is poor communication. You see, this is the point though, is that there's a difference when you read the Word of God, you make an observation about it. This guy who was talking to me on my wall, who thought, he was just use the Hebrew, those are pagan god names and all this and that. And I was explaining to him, you talk to your crowd in the language they can understand. Unless they understand that that's the name, which it wasn't described in the post, so they were just going to go like, oh, okay, whatever that is. The fact is that unless you describe it, just like what it says there with speaking of tongues, I said if your theory is correct, then you have a bit of a problem. The spiritual gift of tongues, which is language, it says that they spoke to him in their language, right? But it was translated to them. They heard it in their own native tongue. Okay? It didn't say, well, just speak Hebrew to them, and if they don't get it, that's their problem. Even the gift, the spiritual gift, allowed you to speak, and instead of having to translate it, the Spirit translated it for them so that they heard it in their own tongue. If they were Greek, they heard it in the Greek, even though the people might have been speaking Hebrew. You see, so even the spiritual gift says, hey, speak to people in the language they can understand. That's why it says about the gift of tongues, that if you're going to speak in another language, you have to have an interpreter. Otherwise, the person doesn't know what you're talking about. They're going to think you're drunk, just as it says, because you're speaking in a language that sounds like gibberish to them. So this is about understanding. But he pointed to the verse and he said, see, it says make no mention of other gods. And I said, okay. We both see it. He said, see, that proves my point. It doesn't prove your point. We both see the same sentence. The difference is, it's what meaning do you attach to that. It's the context that you put that verse in. Because I see some problems with that. Moshe was commanded to read all the words of the Torah in the ears of the children of Israel. Guess what's in there? Names of false gods. Molech and Ashtoreth. All these God gave to Moshe, so if he spoke them, I don't know if it just came to his mind or spoke them, but if God spoke them, and they're not supposed to be spoken, then we have a problem there. And then on top of it, Moshe is commanded to read the Torah aloud to the people. So, again, you have to make something up and say, well, maybe he just ignored that word. But it does, I'm pretty sure it says that you'll have to read all the words, even the literal description of that command. So, you run into a few problems here. And instead of saying, oh, well, it says it right there, well, you have to take it into the whole context. In Pesach, it talks about Pesach, that we're commanded to do that and to keep that. That's a command. You don't have the option to not keep Pesach if you're part of the children of Israel. But then some people later, if all you did was read that section, in Leviticus 23, you'd say, wow, okay, well, see, there it is. That's it. Anybody who doesn't, we're going to run them out. We're going to kick them out. But then you get other parts of the scriptures where the people who were defiled with the body of a dead person were allowed by God to go ahead and hold their Passover, their Pesach, a month later. But see, if all you did was pluck something out and say, that's it, we don't have to look at the rest of the Torah, we're just going to take this one little sentence by itself, then you're going to come up with a bad theology. In the same way, it talks about, in Leviticus, it talks about that anybody who kills an animal and doesn't bring that blood to the door of the tabernacle, right, is going to be cut off. Well, if you took it just at that surface thing, then all of a sudden you can't eat any meat because it says any animal that you shed the blood, so you're going to have to take it to the temple. There's no temple. But when you read further in the context, what you find out is it says, to the end that they would stop sacrificing animals and giving offerings to devils in the open field. So again, if we pluck something out and we don't look at the other part of it, we're going to come up with wrong things. If you pluck out we're going to get the blessings, but we're not going to keep the commandment part. The Word of God doesn't work that way. You got to take the whole Word of God in there, and that's why studying is important, because if you're not studying the whole Word, you're going to get led astray by all these theories that by themselves, well, if we just look at that verse, it does say that. People sling one-liner verses all the time for all kinds of crazy theologies. The fact is that to understand, even Satan was quoting the Bible to tempt Mashiach. He was misapplying it. He wasn't taking into account the whole thing, or he'd know you don't test God. Okay? This is the problem. This is the problem that we see. So to understand the results, there's a difference between an observation and a meaning. Meaning is what we think the observation. So we can both read the verse, and a Christian who thinks the law is done away with says, oh, we're not under the law. And they say, see, it says it right there. But what they believe that means is then that the law is done away with, and that being under the law would be keeping the law, and so therefore we don't do that. Whereas someone else might say, well, when it says we're not under the law, well, being beneath the law is the standard, and being under it would be to be violating it, right? To be above it, right? Higher than the law would be exceedingly righteous, going beyond what you have to do, and the standard is right there, and being under the law would be to be in violation of the law. But they're both reading the same verse. So the fact is that it's a weak argument to say, well, see, it says right there. Well, it doesn't matter. Because 3 people could read that and get 3 different meanings for it. The real thing that you need to do is study the whole Torah so that you can know that a red flag should come up when one of your theories causes another violation somewhere else in the Torah. If Moshe is commanded to read the Torah, all of the Torah in the ears of the children of Israel, then he's going to speak that name of that false god. So if it says, don't let it be mentioned, and coming out of your lips, then what's that mean? Well, a person has to re-theorize then and say, well, wait a minute, maybe it means, maybe it's in the context of speaking their name, giving them honor, giving them worship, spreading, information about them to other people, or talking to those false gods in the form of some kind of prayer or anything like that. That makes more sense. Because then a person could sit there and say, hey, we don't follow, Molech is a false god and is nothing. Oh, wait, did I just sin in telling someone, you shall not worship Molech? Like the Torah says. So if I'm quoting the Torah, am I sinning? To stop someone else from sinning? I mean, you got to use logic, you got to use common sense, and you got to take the whole context of every word of God. That's why you got to study every word, because the more you get to know all the parts, the more you'll be able to line up all the individual parts, and you won't be led astray by crazy theories. It's just like the milk and meat thing. You've got the messengers of God who sit down, and it says they served them both, butter and a calf. So if your theory is that you don't put milk and meat together, you got a little bit of a problem, because I'm pretty sure something would have been said. And how do the Jews explain that away? Well, they have to, because it's contrary to another theory they made. So they had looked at an observation of don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, and they made then out of that the meaning they put to that was don't have milk and meat together. But then if you take the whole Torah into account, you go, wait a minute, it appears milk and meat are there. And their response is, well, they ate the one, the butter, and let it digest for whatever, 45 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it is till it was fully digested, then they ate the other. But when you read the account, it says he set it before them and they did eat. It doesn't say anywhere that they did that. They served them together and they did eat. You see, this is the problem. These are the red flags that should go up when you're looking at a theory. And if you don't know the whole Torah, then you're not going to know when someone's just plucking part of it and trying to pretend to be like it when it really isn't. If you look at it's like the old saying, wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, if you look close enough, you'll figure out it's a wolf and it's not a sheep. Nobody's fooled by a careful examination of the wolf in sheep's clothing? Nobody. You can peel back the clothes and go, well, there's the wolf. If I check every little spot, oh, hey, wait, here's a zipper. What's this? Hey, there's a wolf in there. Like, nobody's fooled by careful examination of a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know who gets punished and fooled by the wolf in sheep's clothing is the person who doesn't pay attention. The person who just glanced over and, oh yeah, it looks like all sheep. Who didn't examine. And the same thing happens in the Torah. The wolves aren't going to fool you with bad theology if you study your Torah and know it so you can find out where things don't work. But if you don't and you just glanced over it and you're like, yeah, okay, we believe in this, but I haven't really looked at every word, I'm not going over it and over and over again. Hey, if that's the case, you're susceptible to deception. So we take a look at this. Blessings, as we see in this week's Parashat, they go through a process. You got to hearken it, you got to keep it, and do it. Why not just say do it? Because keeping it is to guard it. It's not one time. We can say a little sinner's prayer and we're done. We get to go into the kingdom, and it doesn't matter if we're horrible sinners for the rest of our life and call ourselves a Christian, and we're still going to get a pat on the back from God. It doesn't work like that. Okay? It's not a one-time thing. It's about who you are. When Mashiach says, I would that you were one with me as I am one with the Father. Well, how is he one with the Father? How do I measure and compare Mashiach, Jesus, and the Father? First of all, how do we measure the Father? What do we know about the Father? Well, we got to go to the Bible. What's the Bible of Jesus at his time? It was the Old Testament. So who was the Father? Right? The only way a human being could define the Father, unless he was interacting with him and getting new information, the only information we had about the Father prior to the Son coming was his Word, which was the Old Testament. So we hold up the Old Testament, there's the Father, that's everything we know about the Father, and he says that he's one with the Father, so boom, he's equal to the Torah, that's why it calls him the Word, the living Word of God, because that's what we knew as the Father, and he's there. Okay, you're doing it perfect. Right, there you are. You're one. You're Ehad. And he says, I would that you were one with me as I am one with the Father. How you do that without the Torah, I have no idea. Because he's one with the Father, measured by the Torah. He's perfect, measured by what? By the commandments. That's the only thing we can measure. Didn't say he had perfect penmanship. He was perfect, and the standard of measurement was that he obeyed all of the law of Moshe, all of the Torah. That's how he was one with the Father. He said, not thy will, but my will. Or not my will, but thy will. Okay? There's only one will. It comes from the Father. What was the will? How did we know the will of the Father? It's the Old Testament. That's all mankind has ever had as far as the will of God. Other than if they had a personal encounter with God and he told them something new. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the Old Testament. We're dealing with the Word of God. And that's why he's called the Word of God. That's why so he says, I would that you were one with me as I am. In the same manner, in the same way I am one with the Father, which is by keeping all of his Torah. I want you, my disciples, to be just like me, like I'm one, just like with the Father and the Word of God. That's what he wanted. He didn't say, well, we're going to break off and do our own thing that's not the same. That would be the opposite of what he was saying. So this is the key. It takes a process. It isn't just doing it. Then you have to keep it. You have to remember it, right? You have to listen to it. Most people aren't doing these things. This is an ongoing thing, and this is so that you are under the covenant. So people came to him and said, hey, we're the seed of Abraham. Wow. But you could be the seed of Abraham, right? You can be a physical descendant that's not keeping the law, that's not doing it. Then he doesn't even count you, right? Because he says, well, if you were of Abraham's seed, you would have Abraham's works. Right? The same one. You'd be one with Abraham. He obeyed and kept the Torah. You'd be doing the same. But you're not. You're of your father the devil. He's a father of lies. So what they were keeping and doing was a lie. It wasn't the truth. Because they had made an observation, right? They had the Torah. They saw the observation and read it. But the meanings they put to that Torah were different than what the truth was. And that was the big rub between the Pharisees and Mashiach, is that he was coming and telling them what the correct meaning was. They had the Word. It wasn't that they lacked the Word. It was that they didn't have the right means to those things. So we got to be careful about that. Little by little is how, and then it talks about in this week's parashah, he says he's going to cast out the nations before you, and he's going to deliver them, and you can destroy them little by little, right? And you're not to learn their ways. This phrase, little by little, is an interesting one because it's very interesting. It's like the old experiment. If you take boiling water and you put a frog in there in the pot, it'll jump out. But if you put it in there in regular temperature, room temperature water, and you just turn it up a degree here, a degree there, eventually you can get that up to boiling, and you can kill that frog, and he will never jump out, even though he could have just jumped right out. Because it was little by little. See, there's a process. God has processes. There's processes to things. It isn't just, I figured that out, so now I never have to look at that word again because, I know that. Eating kosher is a process. Great example. We learn new stuff year after year. And it's funny because I was at a congregation and a friend of mine's wife said, hey, go ahead and eat. It's all kosher. And I thought, everyone had brought a dish, and I thought, I don't know that. I don't even know that she knows that. Due to the fact that we tend to eat more strict kosher than a lot of people in our area, because we've kind of been doing it a little bit longer, and we don't have kosher restaurants out here. We don't go out to eat. I used to manage restaurants. I know how they work. You can sit there, and it's a growing process. It's not an all. Somebody who just gets started probably couldn't eat the way we eat, right? Because it's a process, and I understand that. So I'm like, okay, thank you, but I'm going to eat what I brought from home. Why? Because I know the ingredients. I've checked them out. I know the companies. I know all of the utensils that touched it. I know the oven that it was sitting on. I know the dishes it's been through. I know all those things. And for the standards that I believe need to be in place, they've met all of those standards. Now, if I go eat your potato salad, I don't know that. I don't know what kind of mayonnaise you use, or what kind of pickles, or eggs, or any of that kind of stuff. I don't know the dish that you used isn't some ceramic dish that you used to make pork chops in, that according to the Torah would have to be broken because it's porous. I don't know that. I don't know the things that you thought were kosher, but you didn't know about those ingredients, that those bugs they use for that coloring of your favorite, snack isn't kosher. But I may have learned those over the years. And so again, maybe you put that in the dish. And so you're going, well, I never cooked pork chops. But I don't know. You see, I don't know the history of what you put in there, what your dish is, all that. I don't know. So to me, it's just, hey, no thank you. A lot of people don't understand this. This is a process. When we first started, you might start off just saying, hey, if I'm going to Subway, I'm going to stop eating the ham sandwich, and I'm going to start eating the turkey. Okay, good. Good job for you. That's what we did. And then after a while, you start to realize, hey, wait a minute. The same guy, right, who just reached and grabbed that big glob of ham, that slimy ham, then reaches in and says, what can I get for you? And he gets your turkey. Now there's pork slime, right, on your turkey. Then you got to say, can't eat that now. Okay. So, well, that's okay, no problem. Let's start over. Yeah, could you change your gloves? Right? That's another one Messianics do. Oh, sure. Okay, I changed on, I put my new gloves. I'm going to reach into that turkey pan. Now, what they don't know is that turkey pan that's sitting right next to the ham pan, all day long he's been taking the ham and dripping it across that turkey pan. And so all that drip has been dripping on your turkey. So even though you look and you go, well, he didn't touch that. He's got a fresh glove on. Great. He's picking up my turkey, putting it right on my bread. Sorry. Probably not kosher. As a matter of fact, sometime I would sit there and watch, and I'm seeing him, and he's grabbing it, and a piece of ham flopped over into the turkey barrel, in the bucket. And I'm like, forget about it. Right? But these are how you learn. Then you go, oh, hey, and then he goes over there and he goes, okay, fine, put new glove, we got this, I just got out of the cooler. Goes over there and cuts your sandwich with the knife that just cut a BLT. It's got bacon juice all over it. Oh, no, can you wash that knife? So he runs a towel across it that he just wiped up a bunch of pork slime off the thing, and now your knife is clean? Oh, well, maybe it was in the water that he's been washing all the ham sandwich and all of that stuff on, and he puts it in a water bucket that has then got all those juices in the bucket. I don't care if there's bleach or not. Then he's I'm going to smear the knife there. Is that good for you? No, it's not good enough. There's slime all over the handle. It's butting right into my bread. Now you've defiled my bread. Okay? Okay, let's say they pull out a brand new knife. They put on, new socks, did the song and dance for you and all that. Then they throw it through that oven. What's that oven got all over it? Bacon splatters all over there. You reach up in there, it's just heated up and dripping all over your sandwich as it's going through there. Oh, well, I'm sure it's not touching as it's scraping. And then the other guy. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. You get to the point where you realize, wait, what if we could get all that off there? Okay, no problem. But you might not have known that turkey that's sliced that's in there, they ran across their Hobart slicer. And they did ham right there. And they didn't wipe it down. And if they did, they didn't take the blade off and clean it all off and make sure there wasn't slime all over the place. At best, they wiped anything real simple. Okay, I managed these places, I can tell you. So boom, boom, boom. If they got it from a factory, guess what? The factory's probably running ham through the same slicer. So it doesn't matter. You'll come to a point in an education and an awareness level where you realize, I'm not getting a sandwich from Subway. It isn't kosher. I don't care what they do. It isn't. Those meats aren't certified. On top of that. So there's, who knows what's in there, in that compressed ball of gel, of guts, when there's certain parts of the animal that are unkosher, certain fats that are not to be eaten. Do you think if it's not certified, they aren't taking all the fat and stuff and blending it in to make that mush and clumping it together? I can tell you they are. Because they ain't going to waste that stuff. Because nobody else than you cares about that there might be parts of, that there's different fats and there's some fats that you don't want to eat. The fact is that, I eat at home. You see? But you couldn't get all that in the first day. How many people are offering you, or are you drinking Kiddush and you're drinking wine that a huge majority of it is clarified with gelatin? Now, it doesn't say it on the ingredients. They use it as a wine clarifier, and then it settles to the bottom. And then they drain out the wine, even though you've had gelatin put into your barrel of wine. So it's defiled. And here, somebody's offering up Kiddush. Hey, you want to do Kiddush with us? And I'm like, let me see what the wine is. And then, how about the glass? And did you just pour one of those gelatin wines in it earlier when you were drinking? Because you don't know that. And even if this wine is kosher, I don't know if that one, then, it's like, no thank you. I like to be able to do things where I've checked all the things out. But see, that's a process. So some people think they're doing Kiddush, and they think, oh, hey, we're going to bring in the Shabbat, or something like that. And they don't understand. They're drinking the pork-defiled product, an unclean thing, causing themselves to be unclean and all their guests on Shabbat. That's horrible. It's a horrible thing. I know it's happening every Shabbat because people are unaware. See, this is part of the concept that there's a difference between what's there and the meaning you put on it and the observation. Some people don't even observe things correctly. It's the little things that can mess you up. See, it says that the time they spent in the wilderness was 40 years. It says to humble them and test them and do all that. Why not just do that in the first 5 minutes? Like Christians think it's all about salvation. So the blood of the Lamb, right? That was a salvation moment. The first use of the word salvation. Be still and see the salvation of YHWH. Boom, okay, here we go. And they're like, great, we're done. But they're not done. God's children were saved by the blood of the Lamb. But then they were brought into the wilderness and given the law. And if they didn't keep the law, God would kill them. And they would not get to go into the promised land. Right? They didn't get to go into the kingdom just because they were saved. That's where a lot of people miss that. It was whether or not you were going to obey. You were saved to obey. Because for those people who were saved and didn't obey, they all died in the wilderness. None of them stepped a foot in the land. So these are the things. It's a process. It takes time. He didn't just take them, as it even says, straight into the promised land. They weren't ready yet. They needed to develop and they needed to grow. So this guy who was saying, oh, we shouldn't use the word God, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wait a minute. First of all, there's a whole bunch of controversy over how different ones are said. Yeshua, Yahushua, Yahushua, Yahushua. There's a whole bunch just for the Son's name, let alone we get into the Father's name, the Tetragrammaton, the YHWH, YHVH, Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahuah. You can go through a whole ton of them. And just because someone thinks that they're right, and the other guy thinks they're right, and there's about as much proof on either side, which means we don't really know. That's why I just spell it. Yod, He, Wah, He. That's what we were given. We weren't given the vowel points. We don't know how it's pronounced. And so why try and take something that isn't given to you? Because if you're wrong, then you're constantly saying you're saying God's name wrong. How do you feel when someone enunciates your name? You feel like, wow, this person doesn't know me. It's not very flattering. So the fact is that all this argument and stuff like this, it doesn't even make sense. And then on top of that, he didn't probably used to use those names. So the fact is, it's great that you like to write everything in Paleo Hebrew. Hey, good for you. But the fact is that the person who might just be getting started or might not know that yet, that might be overwhelming for them. And you're not giving them the mercy to give them the time to learn and develop. Just like YHWH allowed them 40 years in the wilderness. Right? To learn His laws, to practice them, to get them right. Because step into the kingdom, now you better be able to do them. There's a process. All this stuff goes a process. The blessings are a process. You have to learn you have to first hearken. Then you have to learn how to do them. And then you must keep them and guard them over and over again if you want to be part of that covenant. So it's interesting. Then we get into the part where he talks about, Israel almost has it exactly backwards. They don't remember the commandments, yet they carry around and remember the sin of the old ways. They don't give those things up, right? Israel does it, we do it. How many people still have bad theology from Christianity, or they have things of the world, worldly things that they're still doing, even though maybe they shouldn't? It's that little bit of leaven. And we have to constantly be working to get rid of those little things. Every year get a little bit more righteous. Every year learn a little bit more, just like eating kosher. And eventually you will conform more to the image of Elohim and Mashiach, which is holiness. So don't be afraid to make changes. And don't be afraid. At the same time, you have to be humble enough to turn around and not expect that just because you're in some place mentally, that everybody should be right there. That is very ignorant, and I see it all the time among the Messianics. Somebody, because they figured out the special name and enunciation of God, then everybody should be doing it, or they're sinning. Even though they weren't that harsh on themselves when they didn't have a clue that was how it was supposed to be done either. They were just taking their time, learning it piece by piece until they assembled and got the understanding that they did. Now they want to force the other person to go 0 to 100 wherever they're at, because now that I've figured it out, shouldn't everybody be here? Shouldn't everybody be thinking the same thing? And it's like, no. They're all learning at different paces. And to start saying, well, they better do it, or they're sinning, well, it's like, then how many sins are you doing right now that you don't even know about? Because you aren't wise enough to know that a year from now you're going to look back and things you're doing today, you're going to realize are wrong. So the same slack and measure that you want to be measured by, you need to measure with other people and realize that it's okay. If they're saying Jesus and they want to know about the name, tell them. But don't sit there and be like, wow, they're sinning because they're using these pagan names, and that they're just horrible people because they're doing all these things wrong. Because it's like, it's a process. Let them have their chance to grow just like you got your chance to grow. Come alongside him if they want your help, but don't feel like, well, I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to unfriend him because he's using this name and I don't use the word God. Well, let me tell you just a couple things. First of all, the arguments for God being pagan are pretty weak and flimsy. there's a problem among the Messianics in that as long as it's plausible, it's what happened. It's a fact. Okay? Google the word plausible. Google the word correlation and causation. Get a few terms under your belt. Because the problem is, just because a theory sounds like it doesn't not work, or, okay, I could see that working, or I don't see how that doesn't work, doesn't make it true. People come up with theories all the time. I love history. Their history it wouldn't stand up a half a second, even in a scientific nature. Why? Because you know what they want with science? Documentation. Show me. Don't come to me and tell me, oh, well, because Jesus sounds like Zeus a little bit, so hey Zeus is like hey Zeus. It isn't. Study your languages. That's not how it works. People are confusing what something sounds like and what something means in another language. That's poor scholarship. Okay? People go, oh, well, God sounds like Goth, which was Goth, which was this, which was a pagan deity. I don't care if a pagan deity's name sounded like something. That doesn't mean that was the origin of that word. And what happens is a lot of flimsy things that sound kind of interesting come up, and then people just swallow them up and go, yeah, I don't need to verify that. I don't need to see that. I don't need outside proof that those were the names of that and that that's the origin. It just sounds like it might connect, so we'll call it that's how it was in history. And now I can go beat over the head to other people who are saying that and say, hey, wait, didn't you know that was a pagan god? It's kind of like fossilized customs. There's some good things in that book. But there's also times when I think maybe it's a bit of a stretch, maybe it's a little flimsy. It's like, example, saying a ring, right? You could say that is a serpent eating its own tail. The everlasting serpent. Yeah, I'm just making this up as I go. Maybe that's Satan. Maybe that's Satan worship. Yeah, that kind of sounds right. And I bet I could find a ring that someone made that looks like a serpent, and then that kind of back it up. Maybe it's the sun. That's sun worship. Maybe all circles then are sun worship. Do you see the flawed logic in that? Cut a tree down. It's got rings. Is that a form of ancient sun worship? The circle, a shape of a circle, is not necessarily worship of the sun. That's poor scholarship. Okay? Does it mean that no devil worshiper ever wore a ring? And does it mean that they never looked at a circle and thought that's the sun and we worship it? Does that mean everyone who created a wheel or had a wheel was worshiping the sun because they have a circle? No. That's an example of poor scholarship. We got to start plugging our brains in and thinking about these things, and not just jump on the bandwagon because we hear some great story that seems like it works, and then so we'll just add that as a fact in our mind and start teaching other people, but that's history. Really? Where's your documentation? Where are the documents? Where are the writings? Most history is based on so little documentation, and that documentation doesn't have documentation for it. You know what? There's people who think all kinds of crazy things. And if all we had was their little book, if all we had was, the Book of Mormon, people in the future could go, well, everybody believed X, Y, Z. Because we can see it right here. And it's like, no, that isn't history. That wasn't the real-time history. That's what one person thought. I could go to a movie that was the best movie that anyone ever saw on the planet, and I could say I thought it was stupid, and I could write it down, and someone could find it 100 years ago, and they could build a whole religion based off of the fact that this was a horrible movie, and nobody liked it, and it was rejected and outcast and all that, because they found one little document. So don't tell me about your history, because your history is built off of such a small fragment of the people that existed and that we have. It is a joke. So before you go building your whole theory, realize it's just a flimsy theory, and just because something's a circle doesn't mean that's based off of sun worship. Just because you can make it look like that, or even if somebody did, doesn't mean that's its origin, doesn't mean that that's where it came from, doesn't mean that that's the only way it was ever used. And I use this example. The word El, God in Hebrew, is used to describe pagan gods, right? And Elohim, right? When he brought judgment against the Elohim of Mitzrayim, the gods of Egypt. It's using for pagan gods and for God. Okay? So this whole theory that, oh, wow, if it was somehow... Well, you hate to break it to you, but that's already happening in the Hebrew too. So to create this whole theory that, oh, this is that, and if it ever had anything to do with, oh wait, there's animal sacrifice. Well, guess what? Satan worshippers did an animal sacrifice. Does that mean then we look and go, oh, well, this must mean the book of Leviticus has actually been tainted because we know that the original people were doing animal sacrifice for Satan worshippers, and therefore the Levitical system is following after the origins of paganism. No. There's nothing to say that both religions didn't do sacrifices of animals. And that doesn't take that and make it pagan by nature. Even if a person says first or second. Both cultures might have wore shoes. But if a Satan worshipper wears shoes first, it doesn't mean that anybody who does that after theirs is following the ways of the Satan worshippers. It's just ridiculous. We've got to start plugging our brains in and thinking a little bit more intelligently. Because you know what? The enemy of truth is ignorance, really. And misinformation. Because that makes lying so much easier. When you don't know anything, when you don't think logically, when you don't question something and make sure and want to check it out, when you don't do those things, it's so easy to deceive you. It's so easy to feed you a lie and have you love it. Because there's nobody who's thinking intelligently or checking these things out. This is about understanding the results, right? It's about the process. It's about the details. It's about what labels and meanings we put to this. It says in here, it says, YHWH is the one who gives you the power to get wealth. Does it say the wealth? See, people don't listen to the word. He gives you the power to, the ability. There's a process of getting wealth. It isn't just about getting wealth, because other spots it talks about some wicked people, they have a lot of wealth, and some righteous people have a lot of wealth. It isn't the wealth, it's the power to do that. It's the process that He'll allow you to do that. It isn't about, a lot of it, it's kind of like forgetting the golden calf. We see that the golden calf is brought up again in here. You see, once we think we figured something out, we don't want to think about it again. See, but Israel sinned. You want to know which ones they don't remember? Not only do they not remember the commandments of God, they also don't remember their own sins and mistakes they made. Otherwise, they could learn from them and hopefully not make the same mistake. They don't remember that they just complained a little while ago and God killed a bunch of them, and now they're complaining again. Do you see the problem there? And I see it in our religious organizations all over the place. People go, oh, well, the Jews, the Judaism at the time of Mashiach did this, so therefore that's valid. We should be doing it. Well, it's like, really? The Jews of 2,000 years ago got the temple taken away from them. And they got corrected by the living Word of God because they didn't have it right. I wouldn't exactly start copying everything they were doing. Right? Because then you're going to be copying their mistakes as well. Now, if Mashiach came back and said, wow, you Jews, you got it all down perfect, bam, awesome, then you could use that as a good reference. But that's not what happened. They got corrected and corrected to the point they wanted to kill him because he was making them look bad. And then they didn't know the time of their visitation and they got God's house removed from them. That doesn't tell me that they were doing an awesome job. And that doesn't tell me I should try and act like them or do the things they were doing or have the understandings they have or evaluate the Torah that they did. Doesn't mean you throw everything out. But it doesn't mean you pass it through with a stamp of approval, anything they do. That's ridiculous. It's about being aware enough. It's about having your own Ekev in your head. If what the Jews were doing doesn't violate the Torah and seems acceptable, then okay, fine. But if this seems to violate the Torah in multiple places, then I don't do it. Right? It's if and then. It's about thinking. It's about using your brain. If I hear this theory that this is how it was always done in history, then I have to plug my brain in and say, is that a good thing? Because people have been sinning since the beginning of history too. And the book mostly talks about Israel, God's people sinning. So it's not just, it was someone else. No, God's people continually upset him to where he's going to destroy him and do all this. So should I be copying anything that they did in the past? No. right? Moshe intercedes. This is interesting. 40 days, 40 nights. See, it's a process. He didn't just go up and say, hey, people sinned. Can you just give me another set of tablets? He has to work at it. He has to fast the same way he did before to receive that. This is a process. Learning to get more righteous and eat kosher, it's a process. If you think, hey, I learned that, I'm done with that, and you put it away, you're not in a process anymore and you're missing it. You're supposed to grow in righteousness. The problem is it says the Father is the gardener, right? There's an expectation of growth. If a plant isn't growing, right, it's just going to wither and die, right? The tree is supposed to bear fruit. In order for it to do that, it has to go through a whole process. So if you're not moving, if you're not growing, if you're not going through that process, then there's a problem. And you're going to end up not having fruit that you're supposed to have. Those will be cast down and burned. See, our requirements are to fear Elohim, to keep walking His ways and keep His commandments. That's what it says. That's not easy. That's a process. See, here's the thing. Even the rain, as we get into the end of the Parashat, it says even rain, if you keep the commandments, He'll bring you the rain. Which means if you don't, you're not going to have the rain. He talks about if you keep the commandments, you'll have long life. If you don't, you won't. And in the half-Torah, it talks about if you keep all of the commandments, then you'll possess the land. You see, these are all parts of a process. You got to stop being ignorant and letting people dumb the process down. This is work. This is work. And it requires study. And it requires thought. And it requires intelligence. And I'm sorry, but the ignorant are going to be the ones that are led astray the easiest. And if you're ignorant about matters of the Torah, it's your own fault. Because you're refusing to work in the field. You'll starve to death. So, till next time, I'm going to say keep studying the Torah. Learn to understand the results and think about it. Think about everything. Think about if it makes sense. Think about where it doesn't. Understanding is when you weigh things out. It's when you know relationships between things. How can you know what someone says if it's in relationship to the Torah, to other parts if you haven't studied and you haven't read? You need to know those things. You need to realize you may be mislabeling some things and that you're growing and you may get that, so don't get overzealous on other people. Study it, be humble, and learn and grow so that you can learn and grow even more. And you can remove the lies, not from everyone else that everyone else believes. The lies you believe are the most dangerous to you and to your soul. The ones that you don't think are lies are the ones that are going to kill you. So you have to study and be open to listening to other people who hopefully study. That's a good crowd to get into if you get people that are actually studying the Scriptures with an open mind, not so that they can be praised or important. So, till next time, I'm going to say Shalom.